Locals refer to the reservoir next to this small village in Siberia as the sea, because you can't see the far bank. In the summer, if you try hard, you can imagine you're vacationing at some southern resort. But there are no such illusions in winter, when the temperature can plunge to minus 45 degrees. In the village, which we'll call Ivangorod, there's a school, a care home for the elderly, a community centre, a couple of grocery stores, a clinic and a poultry plant. There are about 1,000 inhabitants. The school, a single-storey building, is small yet full of life. There are less than 50 students of various ages and just 10 teachers. Some years have no kids at all, others have 1 or 2. In the autumn, kids pick apples from the trees in the playground during break and eat them on the steps.
В школе были очень классные дети.
The kids were amazing. I was the foreign tutor for year 8 and 9, but I also taught history and social studies to all years. I started a chess club for the little ones, and we played football after school. I did everything a teacher can possibly do, and it felt like a real happiness, because the response from the kids was incredible.
This is Pavel. He's a history teacher. Although he grew up in Siberia, he was living in St. Petersburg when he took up a post at Ivangorod School in the autumn of 2022.
Я был на уроке в 5 классе.
I was in year 5 class when one of the boys came up to me and asked, if someone goes to war, could they die? And I said, yes, they could. 2 weeks later, his family received a notification that his father had been killed.
Impoverished, isolated villages like this are a fertile recruiting ground for the Russian army, with big salaries and sign-on bonuses making joining up a tempting prospect. Unlike Russia's big cities, where it's easy to ignore the war, in villages like Ivangorod, this is impossible. Everyone knows someone at the front. Pavel opposes Russia's war in Ukraine. On February 24, 2022, the first day of the full-scale invasion, he took part in an anti-war protest in St. Petersburg and was detained by police. The fallout from this spell in custody, as he tells it, was that he was blocked from finishing his history master's degree. His dream of becoming an historian lay in tatters. Instead, he enrolled in a Russian program, equivalent to Teach for America in the United States, or Teach First in the UK, that placed young professionals in schools struggling with teacher shortages. 6 months later, he was sent to Ivangorod. He remained there for 2 years. Even though the front lines were thousands of kilometers away, the war found its way into the classroom through textbooks, events, and individual conversations. So what does it mean to be a history teacher during wartime? What do you do when propaganda becomes part of the curriculum? Is it possible to be honest? And what is the price of that honesty? Hello and welcome to Russia Underground. I'm Howard Amos, a journalist who reported from Russia for nearly a decade.
And I'm Nina Berezna, a Russian citizen and a political researcher. This is the second mini-series of our podcast. Over 3 episodes, we're exploring a subject that's become increasingly relevant in Russia today: the fight against forgetting. Who controls history, what's being erased, and how are ordinary people fighting back? During Putin's 2-decade rule, the Russian state has tightened its grip on the education system. But since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, this process has accelerated dramatically, with militarization reaching even the youngest students. In many schools, children take part in drills, parades, and weapons training. They write letters to soldiers on the front lines, make camouflage netting, and even learn how to fly drones.
History has been at the forefront of this battle. Most infamously, a new high school history book was written by Vladimir Medinsky, a former culture minister, presidential aide, and outspoken nationalist. Medinsky once claimed that objectivity in history is a myth, and that patriotism is more important than truth. His textbook describes Ukraine as a Nazi state and accuses the West of trying to destroy Russia.
But while the Kremlin expands its control over what is taught in schools, there are some teachers who try to remain true to their conscience and their profession. The risks for these men and women are real. Since the beginning of the war, at least 150 teachers in Russia have faced some form of punishment for expressing anti-war views or deviating from the curriculum. Some were fined or fired. Others have faced criminal charges. In today's episode, we speak to teachers working across Russia, from big cities to remote villages. These are people who are trying to preserve honesty in the classroom, even as the space for truth continues to shrink. As in other episodes, we have changed the names and some of the details of our interviewees for security reasons. Tucked away in a quiet part of one of Moscow's old, leafy neighborhoods is a school that you reach by leaving the noisy street behind, walking past Soviet apartment blocks and into a peaceful courtyard filled with trees. This is a state school, but it's not a typical state school. The children tend to come from elite Moscow families, including the families of high-ranking officials. It's also relatively small by Russian standards. It's where social science teacher Vasily has worked for many years.
После начала полномасштабного этапа войны
Of course, things changed after the war started.
их
You couldn't not feel it.
начиная
Some of my colleagues left the country.
как уехала.
In the weeks after the full-scale invasion, about 10% of the staff at Vasily's school quit, with many of them fleeing the country. It was a huge rupture. Even the families of some kids emigrated.
Я, честно говоря, думал весной.
Honestly, I thought there'd be tons of questions that spring,
Их почти
but there were almost none. I mean, they are high schoolers. They already kinda knew what was going on. They read the same news outlets that I did.
новостные каналы, что и я.
When questions did come, Vasily answered them, clearly, directly. Some of his colleagues began calling the war by its official Kremlin euphemism, the special military operation. But for Vasily, the truth felt more important, and he carried on referring to it as a war. Vasily had been inspired to become a teacher by his grandmother, who was involved in the Soviet dissident movement.
Я с детства
That's the world I grew up in. I was raised on stories about history and about those who stood up for human rights.
In the classroom, Vasily tries to preserve a sort of neutrality, excluding both state propaganda and his own anti-war views. He says that kids shouldn't be allowed to, for example, wear ribbons with the blue and yellow of Ukraine's flag, not because support for Ukraine is bad, but because it would mean other children would have a reason to wear pro-war symbols.
ты поднимешь эту тему,
If you bring up this topic, it will be obvious the emotions you yourself feel, and it will be extremely hard to talk about it in a neutral way and not communicate your emotions to the pupils. If you do, you will soon have hysteria in the classroom, and you'll need to calm them down yourself. Why do we need to create conflict inside the school?
Much has changed in Russia's schools since the war started. Educating kids to support the regime is now a top government priority. History, literature, and social science are seen as ideological tools, and teachers face pressure to show that they're politically loyal. Those who resist can lose their jobs or even end up in jail. There are no official statistics, but about 20 teachers have been criminally prosecuted, and at least 4 have been sentenced to prison. In a chilling throwback to Stalinist times, official pressure often starts with anonymous denunciations from colleagues, students, or parents.
После моих таких разговоров со старшими классами,
After those conversations with all the kids in February 2022, the story somehow got back to their parents. I still don't know which student said what.
This is Alexei, a history and social science teacher. When Russian tanks rolled across the border into Ukraine, he was working at a school in a small town in the Kaluga region, about 90 miles south of Moscow.
это был четверг.
It was Thursday, I recall. I had a lesson with year 9s just a few hours after the full-scale invasion began. I told them war had started. They immediately got quiet, more serious. They started thinking more carefully. But this was literally the morning of day 1. The military action began around 5 a.m. and our class was at 9 a.m.
Reactions varied. Some students supported Russia, others were shocked. Some didn't know what to think. At that moment, Alexei says, he felt it was important to talk to them honestly about the magnitude of what was unfolding. But his decision didn't go unnoticed. It was discussed among the students, and then some parents found out. Eventually, someone told the school administration. It's still unclear who exactly denounced him, but the head teacher called Alexei in for a talk.
И директор рассказал, что как я имею право
She told me, how dare I discuss such things with students when our soldiers are on the front lines fighting for a just cause for our country,
сражаются
helping make Russia strong and independent. The conversation quickly became personal. Her tone was aggressive. I tried to stay calm, but my comments weren't exactly polite either. I didn't swear or anything, but I just said things about her behavior from an educational point of view. It clearly touched a nerve.
что это ее не красит, очевидно, ее задело.
According to Alexei, as well as being a supporter of the invasion, the head teacher also made discriminatory comments about migrants, Ukrainians, and the West. It seems these weren't just efforts to ensure she kept her job, it was what she genuinely believed. Like Pavel, Alexei was also working at the school as part of the Russian program equivalent to Teach for America in the US. After the incident with the head teacher, Alexei found out that she had asked the program to replace him with a more loyal history teacher. So, his supervisor and the regional coordinator came to the school for a meeting.
Самая комичная ситуация произошла потом.
It was kind of funny. They showed up my mentor, who had worked with me for 2 years, and the regional head. They just told her there won't be a new teacher, no money, no staff, no resources. After that, the head teacher suddenly got very nice. She'd say things like, "What a great history teacher we have, how lucky we are he came here, how wonderful that he's working with our students." She was all smiles. I guess she hoped I'd stay, and from then on, we had no more run-ins.
И после этого никаких конфликтов с ней у меня не было.
It's not hard to understand why Alexei's head teacher made this volte-face. Staff shortages are one of the biggest problems for Russian schools. While Alexei was shocked by the attempt to get him replaced, he decided to continue working at the school. But the experience of being anonymously denounced meant he was much more careful going forward.
In Evangorod, where Pavel, the teacher who we heard from at the beginning of this episode, worked, the situation was very different. In his remote rural school, administrators protected him. Local officials regularly demanded the head teacher deliver 100% attendance at pro-war events. But the head teacher allowed younger anti-war staff to stay at home.
Но она действительно...
She told us, like, guys, I get it, I understand your position, it's fine, but firstly, just don't share it with the students. And secondly, be careful online, don't give them a reason to start trouble. That's all. Other than that, she'd say, let's do what you think is right. She was patriotic, but in a way that meant everyone should have the right to express their opinion.
Before Pavel became interested in history, he had wanted to become a priest. He even spent several years studying in a seminary, and his experience helped him navigate the situation at school in Evangorod as the war raged in Ukraine.
Я просто проучился долгое время в...
I've spent a lot of time in religious schools and Orthodox seminaries. In the Russian Orthodox Church, we usually pray in Church Slavonic, but if you are in favor of using modern Russian in a prayer, that is sometimes enough to get you into trouble. You could even get expelled. So I was already used to, navigating tricky situations, finding ways around things. I was clear in my mind that the invasion was a crime, a tragedy, but I still let the pro-war kids speak. I needed the classroom to be a place where everyone could say what they truly thought, and that felt really important.
Pavel didn't avoid talking about the war. In fact, he gave students permission to talk about pain and empathy. Some students fully supported the invasion. Some had relatives fighting on the front lines.
В этой работе...
For me, the first real step in that work was this. Kids began to speak about other people without labels, without dehumanizing them. That's what mattered.
Less than 2 weeks after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, schools across Russia held special, state-ordered lessons about what was happening. Teachers walked students through the Kremlin's version of events. These lessons marked the beginning of a broader transformation of Russian schools under the pressure of wartime politics. This ideological shift has seen patriotism, military service, and state loyalty take center stage in the classroom. Veterans of the fighting in Ukraine sometimes visit schools to talk to the kids. Classrooms have been renamed in honor of fallen soldiers. Memorial plaques have been installed. And some schools have even opened their own war museums. Students all over the country have been required to produce things for the front lines. Camouflage netting, candles, care packages, and handwritten letters. By 2024, more than 500 schools in Russia had launched drone training courses. Most controversially, a nationwide Monday morning class called Разговоры о важном, or Important Conversations, was added to the timetable of every single Russian school. These weekly sessions include raising the flag, singing the national anthem, and discussions on topics like patriotism, family, and Russia's greatness. Some feared that Important Conversations was an attempt to broadcast propaganda, indoctrinating children to become loyal servants of the regime. The truth, however, turned out to be more complicated. Pavel was in charge of teaching Important Conversations in his Siberian school. He volunteered to teach these lessons because he knew that otherwise they'd be taught by a staff member who was pro-war.
Приходили какие-то разнарядки.
We got these instructions from the education department, like, we need X numbers of letters written for soldiers on the front. But we found common ground. Even if we oppose the war, even if we think it's a tragedy, we can still treat people humanely, especially the soldiers, the ones who are out there right now.
The letters Pavel's students wrote were not typical messages to troops. They weren't about glory or sacrifice. There were no political slogans or thank yous. Instead, they read like little windows into everyday life. Pavel encouraged the children to write about building a snow fortress or how peaceful their town felt. In other words, what it meant to live a normal life.
То есть даже если мы делали какие-то такие вещи,
So even when we had to go along with these things, there was always a bit of sabotage. And I think this happens in schools all over Russia. A lot of my colleagues who I spoke to were doing the same things. We tried not to offend the sensibilities of the kids whose parents were at the front. We didn't deny their pain. But we also avoided propaganda. No aggression, no dehumanization. We tried to focus the conversation on life here and now.
сосредоточиться было на мирной жизни здесь.
For Alexei, the teacher in Kaluga region, the school was split down the middle when it came to Important Conversations. Half of the teachers followed the lesson plans to the letter. The other half, angry at their workload being increased, just told the kids to do their homework for an hour.
По сути, оно было
Essentially, it was the responsibility of form tutors. It was their cross to bear. And often, yes, many teachers didn't put in much effort and just followed the guidelines handed down from above. At the same time, the other half of the teachers, also a significant number, saw it as an additional unwanted obligation, something they weren't eager to do. So they used this important conversation either as form time with their students or as a time for extra study. In other words, here's your homework, kids, get to work.
Pavel describes several cases in which he rewrote Important Conversations lessons. For example, he showed the film Oppenheimer. Then he talked with his students. What is nuclear power? Where did the bomb come from? And why did some of its creators, like Soviet physicist Andrei Sakharov, later express regret? Sakharov, of course, ended up becoming one of the most famous Soviet dissidents. Another time, the class read Leo Tolstoy. He fought in the Crimean War, Pavel told them, and later became one of the strongest pacifist voices of his time. Together, they read Tolstoy's letters and diary entries, and they explored what war does to a person and how that experience could lead to someone rejecting violence.
I still tried to ensure that what the Ministry of Education required from Important Conversations was delivered with the highest quality and in the best way possible. But I did it using different examples. I did it more gently, with a greater emphasis on the individual, not on some sorts of global processes.
Of course, teachers aren't the only people involved in education. It's all very well hearing from Vasily, Alexei, and Pavel, but what about the children and their parents? How have they reacted to the increasing role of propaganda in schools?
It was announced that we will have this разговоры о важном, but when they have started, there are quite a lot of questions from the parents. What is going to be said on these lessons?
This is Olga. She lives in Yekaterinburg, a large Russian city near the Ural Mountains. Her son has just finished primary school. Her daughter is in secondary school.
And the teacher in the class of my son, she said that please don't worry, we will be mostly discussing our internal questions in the class. And I know that in the majority of the lessons, she was attempting to talk about hobbies and leisure time of the kids. So a kid was, for example, presenting something about the sports he is doing.
For her daughter's important conversation lessons, Olga took a different approach.
What I also do is with my daughter, because she's older, I usually allow her to miss the class. Due to the laws and due to the program, it's not an obligatory lesson. And I usually allow her to go to one class per month. So 3 hours she skips, 1 hour she visits, and this doesn't create any serious tension, really. I mean, she's missing. I know she's missing. Well, I'm sorry, or we need to go to the doctor. And when I'm choosing what hour to skip, either this or maths, I would prefer to skip this because, on maths you have exams. And what I know from her, the vast majority of the class is doing the same.
A recent study of Russian educational practices by psychologist Yuri Lapshin and anthropologist Alexandra Arkhipova showed that the situation when it comes to propaganda varies dramatically from school to school in Russia. In schools where the management and staff are mostly pro-regime, kids get significant exposure to propaganda. In schools where the management and staff are indifferent or even predominantly anti-war, there is much more scope for sabotage, resistance, and alternative ideas. Many teachers end up speaking in a form of code, using careful, indirect, or euphemistic language, especially when it comes to topics like the war or politics. Occasionally, though, open displays of resistance go unnoticed or unpunished. Olga recounted how her daughter's class were told to write letters to soldiers fighting in Ukraine. In some schools, like Pavel's, about which we heard earlier, this was an activity that took place during school hours. But in Olga's daughter's school, the teachers gave students the task of writing a letter as extra homework.
She came home, she said that we were asked to write the letters. I said that you can write a letter, you can skip this task. If it's obligatory, it will be my problem to explain that you don't send any letter if you don't want to. So just do whatever you want. It's absolutely up to you.
Olga's daughter ended up writing a very short letter. It only said, "Don't kill anyone."
I don't know if the letter reached the battlefield.
Nobody at school reacted to this brazen anti-war message. Either they just sent the letter on without reading it, or they quietly binned it. Lapshin and Arkhipova's research also found that state propaganda and lessons about patriotism don't necessarily increase genuine love for Russia among kids. Instead, children quickly learn two registers of speech, an official language to interact with adults, and a private, more honest one, among family and peers. Some parents admit they teach kids to play along, to stay quiet, to pretend, which breeds cynicism among teenagers and vulnerability among younger pupils.
Inside our family, we don't have different views or positions on what is happening, because I think it's also hard for the kids when inside the family there are different views. At the same time, we as parents are not trying to make our kids become too politicized. We don't try to infect them with our pains, because it's our pain.
Today, many anti-war Russian parents are caught in a bind. If they openly challenge what their children hear at school, they risk undermining teachers. But if they say nothing, their silence becomes part of a false picture of the world. Psychologists call this the ritual of submission, a mechanism familiar from the late Soviet period. Even if no one truly believes, everyone acts as though they do. Olga says her real concern is her younger son. He's naturally talkative, anti-war, and eager to discuss what's on his mind. He is also too young to see the potential risks in doing so. She's worried this could create problems for her family.
The threat, especially we're still staying in the country and the situation is deteriorating, the threat could be related to his active, position, because he is extremely extroverted person. So everybody will know what he thinks. And at the same time, I think it's very unhealthy to say the kid that you shouldn't be saying that, you shouldn't be saying that. I mean, you're creating some protection for him right now, but you are putting him in the box for his future life. And I don't want to have this kind of influence to my kids.
In autumn 2023, Russia launched a sweeping education reform. Schools across the country began switching to unified curricula, leaving behind the old system that allowed some flexibility in how subjects were taught. The biggest changes came in the teaching of history. At the center of this shift was a brand new history textbook, written by former Culture Minister Vladimir Medinsky, known for his extreme nationalism.
Here we go, just look at the table of contents.
Pavel opens the new history textbook and walks us through what's inside.
Например, во второй главе вообще
For instance, in chapter 2 there's nothing here about daily life or culture.
культуре
It's all Russia under Igor, Russia under Vladimir, Russia under Yaroslav the Vice. The whole framing is history happens through rulers. There is no country without a strong center, a powerful leader. That's the only way the story is told.
иначе как
In chapter 3, it's all about how everything was falling apart. Total fragmentation, chaos. And then the chapter 4, that's where they start talking about Western aggression.
агрессии Запада.
By the time students graduate, Pavel explains, they've absorbed the idea that it's not the state that serves the people, it's the people who exist to serve the state.
Закладывается идея о том, что
It all plants this idea that the kind of state we have today, that's not just normal, it's necessary. There's no room for your family history, no space for your grandfather's story. That's not considered history.
это, в общем-то, не история.
And yet, for all the centralization, Pavel says the new history textbooks are not a catastrophe. Crucially, no one actually watches how the material gets taught, and that gives teachers a kind of freedom by neglect.
Есть такая поговорка,
You know the old saying, the strictness of Russian law is balanced by how rarely it's enforced.
The lack of oversight allows Pavel to teach history in a way that puts people at the heart of the past, instead of states, military victories, or kings and presidents.
очень многие учителя
I really think a lot of teachers all across Russia and around the world too are trying to teach history in a more human way than what the official curriculum allows.
Pavel also believes this approach makes history much more interesting.
я могу увидеть себя самого.
I can see myself in the past, and that, I think, has become the essence of my whole approach to teaching. Now, the entire history course I teach is built around that idea of humanity and of looking back. It's like we're living a day in the life of a peasant in the time of Yaroslav the Vice, or we're going to barbecue in Paris in 1758 and then in Moscow in 1758, and comparing where was it more expensive, what did people eat, what was the daily diet like, that kind of thing.
Other teachers, like Vasily, the Moscow teacher who we met toward the beginning of this episode, argued that, whatever their distortions, the new Medinsky history textbooks can be an opportunity for creative and talented teachers.
Плохо написанный учебник.
You know, a badly written textbook is perfect for teaching critical thinking. You can show students, here is how history can be manipulated.
And some history teachers simply don't use the new textbooks. They hand out older history textbooks that are less ideologically driven. Alexei, who left his job in Kaluga region after 2 years and moved back to Moscow to take up a post in a private school, told us he doesn't use the Medinsky textbooks. His new school is one where liberal values and anti-war sentiment are the norm, rather than the exception. And the Medinsky textbooks sit gathering dust in a corner.
Прекрасные новые учебники.
Those nice new textbooks, the blue ones with Medinsky's name on the cover, they are sitting neatly on the shelves in our library, because by law they have to be there, so they are.
On live TV at the end of 2023, Putin quoted the German statesman Otto von Bismarck. Wars are won not by generals, but by school teachers and priests. Putin's point was there should be more Ukraine war veterans sent into classrooms in Russia to help instill pride in the achievements of the armed forces. But if we take Bismarck seriously, we could just as easily flip this argument on its head.
What if, in a village school, thousands of kilometers from the front, a teacher builds a classroom where disagreement doesn't mean danger? Government pressure closes many doors, but sometimes it pushes people to find new ones. And in today's Russia, as we've seen when it comes to family history and now in classrooms, resistance often doesn't look like a desperate shout of anger. It looks like a conversation, a hand raised in the back of the room.
Next time on Russia Underground, we take you to another flashpoint in modern Russia, the country's bookshops, publishers and libraries. What's still being published? What's being censored? And how do readers find the stories that aren't supposed to be told?
You've been listening to the Russia Underground podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please share this podcast with a friend or colleague who might enjoy it. We appreciate your support. Until next time, I am Nina Berezna.
And I'm Howard Amos. Thanks for listening.